Hello and welcome back to Fresh Takes with Dr. Wagner, where we try and unpack some of the health news and get to maybe some more substance behind the headline. Today we're going to talk about gut health. We've got a great article here from looks like the BBC from last week. It's titled "How to Eat Your Way to a Healthy Gut." Section they are categorizing that in is called "Microbes in Me." And this is an interesting one to me, Mark. This seems to be coming up. Gut health in general seems to be coming up more and more and more, even for several years now, it seems like. And I think it's fascinating to think about the fact that humans are a symbiotic organism, that we're maybe more microbe than human. I don't know what that means. But yeah, these things affect mood, energy. Seems like a lot of diseases, a lot of pathology can be traced back to your gut biome. As a layperson, it's fascinating to me, but I'm wondering, how do we take care of these bugs, and how's that relationship best handled?
Well, yeah, I mean, this is a great article, and I love the fact that it's timely. And just last week, it's going to be really hard to make this a short interview. So either we're going to go long, or we'll just be a little bit cursory and maybe come back to it. But you made the point. It's like, we're the symbiotic organism, and maybe the bugs. There's more bugs in us than there is us in us. How could that be? Well, it is true. So if you take your microbiome, which is all the microflora on your skin, nasal passages, nasopharynx, GI tract, and you add all of the number of cells of these microorganisms together, they outnumber us by about 100 to 1. So, but that's just because they're so small, and so it works out size-wise. So our cells are much larger cells, so we're big macrostructures and they're tiny microstructures, and so there can be many of them. They can outnumber us, and without causing some sort of visual distortion. But because of that, they especially in the gut, they form this sort of vast unsupervised lab where they are generating all kinds of they're off-gassing gases, and they're producing chemicals that we then absorb, and it changes our physiology, can change our mental states. So this is not a trivial thing at all, and we're just on the tip of the iceberg discovering how complex this is and what to do about it. So, you scrolled through this article just a few minutes ago with me, and what the article was pointing out was that there is so much we don't know that we need to be a little bit humble and cautious in, saying, well, hey, all you have to do is take probiotics, or all you have to do is eat prebiotics or this prebiotic supplement, and ignoring diversity issues and whatnot. So let's unpack that a little bit, because their basic advice at the end, which I thought was good general advice, was to eat a wide variety of foods. And why would that be? Well, that means we have to back up and look at some of our definitions of how do you feed this microbiome correctly, and then ask ourselves after that, like, is good general advice always good specific advice for people with specific issues? No, probably not, so we can get into that too. So let's back up, because I think some people are still confused about terminology, like what's a probiotic versus a prebiotic. So a probiotic is the bug itself that you're after, like, I don't know, lactobacillus, fill in the blank. There's tons of different lactobacilli, or bifidobacter, fill in the blank. There's tons of those. So that's the actual bug that you're after, and it's a probiotic because these are particular bugs that we find, or that we strongly suspect based on some research, that these are very good for us. So those would be probiotics. And then you have the prebiotics, which are basically the food for probiotics. So they're a prerequisite, you could say, to having a healthy probiotic or a healthy microbiome is having good fuel for that. So the prerequisite would be a prebiotic. And those would be foods with either starch or cellulose structures in them, mostly plants, obviously, so that we don't actually break down that much. And they form a lot of the fiber contents of our foods. And the advantage of that is, since we don't use them, they get far enough down into the gut, all the way down to the colon, actually, and they feed the good bacteria. Now, they can also feed bad bacteria, and we'll get to that. So it depends on how healthy things are down there, how good prebiotics actually are for you. So let me stop right there and just stop because that's already a lot of information. Do you have any questions about what I just said?
No, you've hit on all of the stuff I had in my notes. What's a probiotic versus prebiotic?
Yeah. Okay, so let's move on to the whole conversation about microbial diversity, because it turns out that people who are sick in our society with any number of different illnesses, one of the common denominators that we're finding is that they have low diversity in their gut. So instead of having an excess of 250 species represented down there, they have maybe only 150. And maybe they have the ratios are all whacked out as well. So they're dysbiotic. That's bad ratios, and they have poor diversity. So that's a problem. And another problem is totally technical. At this moment, I just realized that my battery is about to die on my computer.
Oh, I'll
So
hold. Let's just keep rolling.
if
You
you
can
will
plug that
hold,
in.
we'll keep rolling. Let me plug it in just a sec. And we're back. Sorry about that. Right, so what we were talking about was diversity and how important that is because it turns out that you need lots of different types of bugs, not just lots of different quantities of certain bugs. So how do you achieve that? Well, one of the alarming things is, one way to look at what should be is to look at the pathology of the way things are, the way things shouldn't be. And it turns out that the modern lifestyle is a perfect recipe for denuding the diversity of our guts, which is why I think we're seeing so many more, particularly autoimmune disorders, and we can get into why that might be. But essentially, the modern lifestyle, these processed foods and toxins and constant rounds of antibiotics really denudes the diversity of the gut microflora and sets us up for this low diversity, dysbiotic gut that isn't functioning well and is a little bit leaky, and that leakiness stimulates the immune system because it's seeing particles it shouldn't be seeing. Immune system kind of freaks out, and if it freaks out long enough, you can develop autoimmune disease over time. So this is a problem, and one of the ways of fixing that is to remove the things in the environmental insults that are denuding the gut microbiome, but also by adding in lots of exposure to potentially different species. And in the past, when we ate from our own gardens and we weren't really locked into the industrialized food chain, we were getting a lot of exposure to soil microbes, because
Yeah, you can't always wash that stuff off.
you can't wash it all off, and so the variety, and we ate a lot. We ate more variety of foods, especially even before agriculture. So if you look at because what agriculture does is we pick a few winners and then we double down on those, whereas the hunter-gatherer societies were exposed to a lot more wider variety of plant foods. A lot of people don't understand that. They think of them only in terms of like, oh, they just ate meat. Anyway, but actually they had a much wider variety of plant foods because they had to gather whatever they could, whenever they could, and try it out. So they were eating much wider variety of plant foods, and so they would get a lot of different types of prebiotics, different types of cellular plant structures, cellulose plant structures, and fermentable and non-fermentable carbohydrates and resistant starches. And they were getting a lot of that kind of stuff to feed the bugs, and then they were getting more diverse bugs because it was just coming from the soil remnants that were on their food. Now we don't have that now because we are in a very sanitized environment. And even when you do go to the farmer's market and you get some heirloom carrots and they've got some gobbets of earth still on them, your first impulse now is to wash every bit of that off and scrub it with a scrubby and get it so clean that there's like peel your carrots, I guess. And I think that's part of the exposure issue. And then there's the exposure to toxins and things that actually denude. So we're not getting the exposure to the good stuff, and we are getting exposure to the bad stuff. And so a lot of us are running around with low gut microbial diversity, and we're sort of a setup for upset there. So that's going to be an issue. And that brings me to something I thought of as I was scanning through this. I thought, okay, so this is very good general advice to eat more wide variety of foods and expose yourself to more types of foods so that you can potentially feed more types of good bacteria. But what about people who are already so far down the rabbit hole and are having so many problems with their gut, that they have by default noticed that they actually can only eat a narrow range of foods without having such severe gastrointestinal distress or bloating, um, that they just can't even function. What do you do with those people? You tell them to eat a wider variety of foods, and that's going to fix it? I don't think so, because now you're in a situation where you've fallen down the well, and you're not going to get out by traditional means. And this is when people really need to go seek the help of a functional medicine practitioner or a naturopath or a nutritional therapy practitioner who knows their way around something called the 4R program. And what the 4R program does is it helps try to reset the microbiome through natural means so that you can get not only more diversity but more of the right kind of diversity, and rehabilitate that gut microbiome and the leakiness of it before you start adding in all these other things like fermented foods and diversity, because you just can't be able to handle those foods if you're bad off enough. So what do those 4Rs stand for? Well, it varies, but usually they stand for remove, replace, reinoculate, repair. So the idea is, we've already talked about removing some of these things that are really screwing up the gut. We talked about the things that there are certain medications like antibiotics, but processed foods are really hard on the gut. So removing these things that are hard on the gut, and then you're replacing things that may have gone missing, like digestive enzymes, because it turns out if you're not digesting your food well enough in the top half of the digestive tract, which involves some hydrochloric acid in the stomach and then some digestive enzymes in the small intestine. If you're not doing a good enough job of that, then what's going to happen is you're going to get all kinds of only partially digested material that's winding up in the large intestine where all the bugs are, and they're going to have a field day. You may start feeding the wrong kind of bugs. And you're going to get this dysbiosis and distortion in who's represented in your gut. So remove, replace mostly digestive enzymes, and then there's this reinoculate and repair duo. Now I like to think of repairing first before you reinoculate, because I like to think in terms of barrier before biome. What I mean by that is you have to fix the barrier function of the gut before you go adding in a bunch of probiotics, because if you have a leaky gut and you add probiotics, even good bugs, if they're leaking out through a leaky gut, are going to stimulate the immune system, and you're going to have problems, because the body doesn't want to see bacteria or fragments of bacteria, these little LPS particles. It doesn't want to see those in the bloodstream, whether they come from good guys or bad guys.
Yeah,
it doesn't matter. The immune system gets freaked out by that. So you have to fix the barrier function before you go loading up on probiotic foods like fermented foods and all these things are supposed to be good for you, or taking probiotics if you're really in a hole. So that's why there's a sequence that needs to be looked at here. And any functional medicine doctor worth his salt can work with you on this. I really, if you want to learn more about it, I really like amymyersmd.com. She's a functional medicine practitioner out of Austin, Texas, and she's got a really nice site, and she really focuses on gut health. So if you want to learn more about that and see her videos and read her blog posts, she really breaks it down. That's Amy Myers, so Amy is A-M-Y, Myers is MYERSMD.com. I would recommend you just check her out for orientation. So general advice is great. Specific advice is better if you have a specific issue.
Well, that's kind of like the core of what we're trying to do here with these fresh takes, is take something that's in a headline that is going to draw a large audience, and then really kind of dig into that and find out, is there more to this story, or worse, is this misleading, which hopefully we don't find too often. So this actually, that's very interesting. I don't have any questions for you specifically, but it does make me want to get into the topic of leaky gut in more depth. So we'll look for a story about that. We'll see if that comes up in the news.
And the other thing we should talk about is, this article mentioned psychobiotics, like specific strains of bacteria that have been identified, at least in animal models and in some human studies, that seem to be beneficial for mental health. And I think that's an exciting area where we do have enough information to at least try to take action and supplement some things. There are several lactobacillus species and Bifidobacter longum in particular that are associated with improvements in brain fog and improvements in equanimity And so I think those actually are worth looking at and maybe trying out.
Yeah. All right. Well, we'll keep an eye out for those two topics. Thanks a lot, Mark. Talk to you soon.
All right. Bye bye.